Abby, if you haven't been a part of these Idea Labs, this is my friend Jacob. He is he's one of my good friends on the staff. I've really enjoyed the last couple years.
Best friend on staff?
BFF.
Oh, I like that.
Don't tell the others.
Okay, they'll never see this
It's
video.
like my kids asking if I'm their favorite. You know, it's like, yes, of course you're my favorite. I say it to all three of my kids. So speaking of kids,
yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about you and not just about that one subject of but give us a little background on you. Give us a minute or two of who you are.
Yeah, so I've been in a volunteer role in youth ministry for over 10 years, and that's my calling. I'm not called to be on staff. I could not do what you do as staff to youth workers who are paid full-time, who do that. But I get to work underneath the leadership of some incredible youth pastors, and I've been able to do that over the course of the last 10 or so years. And on the YS side of things, I live in kind of the digital world of stuff. So I do a lot of stuff with social media, and I help out. I have a lot of conversations with youth pastors and youth workers about how students are using social media, and then ways that they can help parents have conversations with their kids about social media. So that's why this is an important topic for me.
Yeah, but I wanted you to say another thing though too, and that you're married.
That's true. Yes, I am married.
And
that's
you
a
have
fact.
an additional
member
in the household now too, and I think that's pretty cool.
We've got a cat. Her name is Minnie. No, just kidding. But we do have a cat named Minnie. But we just had a baby. His name is Owen. He's amazing. It's every bit as terrifying and exciting as I think it would be, right? Yep. It's like 10 on both of those scales, but it's pretty awesome. He's 3 months, and we love it.
And just so you know, all the advice that he's going to give you right now about teens and technology and all that type of stuff, completely going to change in 12 years from right now.
Right?
Yeah, all of it's changed for me. I've got 3 kids, and 2 of them are teens or preteens. So, hey, what are some of the key things that influence how our kids are using technology and media and stuff today?
Sure, yeah, and I'm glad that you bring up the fact that I've got a 3-month-old, right? And so a lot of what I've learned about the way in which kids are using technology is by working with them directly, but also by talking a lot with parents of teenagers. And what I've seen, kind of the first official thing that happens is this realization that we live in a world with no technological boundaries, right? I mean, do y'all remember the dark ages where you had a phone that had a cord that then plugged into, that then like plugged into the wall? And so there was a literal boundary around that technology. And the same thing in the household I grew up in. We had one phone line, which meant you could either be on the internet or use the phone, right? So there's a literal boundary there. And then when TVs were the only place where you could watch TV shows, and we had that huge box set that you had to smack a few times because it would always get crazy. So you couldn't pick that up and carry it with you. So there were those literal boundaries that were around technology. And as I'm talking with parents of teenagers and youth pastors, the thing that they keep saying is they're having these realizations that not only is it obvious that we are connected to that technology 24/7, but it becomes an integral part that kids start to understand themselves and the world around them. And so it becomes the way in which they get to know who they are, and they answer key questions like, who am I, where do I fit in, and does my life matter, using that type of technology. And then that sort of leads into like a flow of a conversation where we talk about how that technology then becomes a window through which kids see themselves in the world around them. And so that means that Instagram isn't just an app where you can post cool pictures with like retro filters. Like, it's so much more than that to a kid who's discovering who they are in this world. It's the way in which they consume ideas about culture and consume ideas about who they should be, the way that they should live their life. If they are too fat or too thin, like they're gauging that stuff through it. But it's not just consumption. It's an opportunity for them to create a life and reveal an image about themselves that they hope then would fit in. So there's this huge back and forth that happens in that, because it is that window through which kids understand themselves and the world around them. And kind of taking it into another aspect of the conversation, there's also this idea, a great friend of mine, Daryl, who's a genius at this sort of stuff, he was opened my eyes to this basic reality that there is an understanding that anything you put online is temporary. Meaning that if you post something and you want it deleted tomorrow or in an hour or even in a few seconds, you can do that and nobody will see it after that. And the reality is that's just not how it works, right? I mean, and it complicates things with apps like Snapchat that make those types of promises, where you can, through a pseudo-anonymity profile, you can sort of give a delete date for Snapchat to delete that stuff. But it's just not 100% effective. Number one, because we saw last year there were over 100,000 pictures that were leaked, right, that were posted without people's permission from Snapchat, that people thought that stuff had been deleted. But also, even if it's just available for a second, I mean, that's long enough for someone to screenshot it and then use it however they want to use it. So then the conversation that I have with youth pastors and parents of teenagers is, how do we help them think critically before they post it? So that way they're not just reacting to those posts, but they're thinking critically about, should I or should I not post this? Because once it's out there, there's nothing you can do about it.
Absolutely. And I love that you transitioned to this, because that's one of the most common questions I get in YS coaching is,
sure,
it's kind of the idea of youth workers and parents. Often it is an adversarial relationship already between parent and youth pastor. A lot of us youth workers out here have felt that, but some of us youth workers are now parents of teens as well.
Yeah.
And here's what I know is, as we become a little bit more attuned to what's going on in media and cell phone usage and everything like that, it's such a bridge that a youth worker
sure
can now have in creating an advocate relationship between youth pastor and parent, by you being the proactive helper to the parent and helping them understand how to use technology. It could bridge that gap. So transitioning to the question I want to ask you is basically, what's your advice to parents? I mean, I am a parent of a teen.
Sure.
You know media far more than me, so we're just having a conversation.
Yeah.
What's your advice for me, man?
Well, what we typically start at in those conversations with parents and youth workers is I bring it to a common ground of realizing that technology isn't the problem. I mean, there's been incredible advancements of technology, but that's not necessarily what's evil, right? I mean, there's this incredible quote that's talking about how your smartphone has more computing power in it than all of NASA did when we put 2 astronauts on the moon. And I mean, that's pretty amazing. And I think astronauts today probably look at that stuff and they freak out a little bit, thinking about that amount of power, that stuff is like squeezed into like a sliver of a brick that's then stuck in your pocket. That's a huge amount of power. And when you give a kid a cell phone, you're not just giving them the latest technology or a new gaming device, but you're giving them a ton of power and a ton of responsibility. And that power has a spectrum, right? I mean, that power is where apps like Taco Text live. Taco Text? You don't know about Taco Text. Let me enlighten you. So it's an incredible app where you have images of tacos, and then you can text them to your friends. Right? I mean, that is the full purpose of that app. People went to school and graduated, spent money on an education and brain power, and decided, yeah, that's where I'm going to put it. You know, so that power, the spectrum that exists, that's something that's like one end of it, right? And then if we're going to take a very serious turn and look at the far other end of that spectrum, that power is also the easiest access point for pornography. And it's so much so that Playboy even recently was talking about how they are no longer a viable business because pornography is so easily accessed through technology today. So that full spectrum is important to recognize, and it's important for parents and youth workers working with parents to help their kids see that when we hand them this technology, we're handing them a ton of responsibility. And so then stepping into practical world, I think it's really important to work with parents to help create healthy boundaries in a kid's life and even in their own life with social media. And I think the way that you do that is, I think you start by just asking kids questions about the physical locations that they use social media the most. And a couple of months ago, I was doing some research with a large group of junior high and high school students in Mississippi. And I was asking them those key questions of, where do you spend the most of your time on social media? And 75% of them said they spent it in bed. I mean, so there's a physical location where social media is used the most for those kids. So then we practically talked about, well, what if we got creative, and what if we created a space, there was a boundary where they didn't need their phone in bed? And so we talked about, well, what do you use it for? And all of them listed through, the fun stuff like apps and games and things. But then we got down to the practical, like, really, if none of that stuff existed, what would you use it for? And they said, for an alarm clock. And so then we were like, well, shoot, Well, all we got to do is go to a thrift store and buy those old alarm clocks with that like one universally annoying alarm that everybody knows, and stick that in their room. And then all of a sudden, you don't need to have your phone in your room at night. Right? That's a really practical, easy way. And then parents were then talking with their kids about, well, then what if we had a unified place at home, like in the kitchen or in the living room, where we just all plugged in our devices at 8 p.m. at night, and we didn't get them until the next morning. And I thought that was brilliant. Like, yeah, so help create those moments and those spaces in a kid's life. And as a part of that, I think it also goes into creating intentional times where the phone and mobile technology just isn't needed. And it's intentional, meaning that you create space where you can connect with one another. So like around the dinner table or during a game night as a family. And I think that's really important to make it intentional. And that way, parents were saying that way we're not just creating boundaries for the sake of creating boundaries, but we're creating boundaries to intentionally connect with one another and help each other understand how do we live, again, with each other without the use of cell phones. So I saw that as a really key idea that I wanted to share with other people, because it's really basic but really important. And then they said, well, as a parent, then I can step in and I can be an example to our kids. I can be the first one to turn off my mobile device and put it away or shut off the TV. And one parent told me about this great app called, it's a free one called Our Pact, OURPACT. Has anybody used that? Okay, well, it seems like a really great app that they use, and what they did is they got together as a family and intentionally said, we are going to have times throughout the day and throughout the week where we are just going to choose to not use our mobile devices. Wow. And then let's together decide what those times are. So it wasn't just a parent dictating like, this time you will not be on your device, but the kids had a say in it. And they were able to pick times when they, as a family, could be off in their mobile devices. And then you load each of those mobile devices into Our Pact, and then you can do on and off times for each of those mobile devices. And so they, as a family, agreed on when each of those mobile devices would be on and off. And then those parents could then set that example. And I think that was key. That was when light bulbs went off for me.
That's awesome. I love that that's where you landed. And the whole idea of being an example, because as we think of youth workers, parents, we're not always setting the example.
Sure.
Man, we like when it comes to our faith. I mean, I want my students in my youth group to be sharing their faith with their peers. Yeah. But as a youth worker, am I sharing my faith with my peers? Not just stepping down and into the lives of the teens and sharing my faith with them, but actually at a peer-to-peer level. Same with technology. The way that I'm acting on social media is the way I should expect my youth group kids or my own kids at home to be there. So
Preach.
Great stuff, man. You know my last question.
Okay.
I ask each of my Idea Lab interviews. You look out at the landscape, great youth workers out here. Yeah. You get to interact with a lot of them on social media. You've gotten to know them. What's your prayer for us as youth workers, man?
You know, I have been fired a couple of times in my life, and those are never fun. And when I got fired, I had these revelations where I was realizing that my value, my personal value, who I am to God, has nothing to do with the success or failure of my day-to-day practical working life. And so I think that speaks volumes into you as ministers, as paid staff, that your individual success and your individual relationship with God has nothing to do with whether kids show up on a Wednesday night, and it has nothing to do with whether or not your ministry is quote-unquote successful or unsuccessful. You are valued so much more outside of that, and you are not totally defined by that. So that's the one thing that I feel like hits me over and over again when I get to sit down with youth pastors and youth workers, is where are we drawing those lines and where are we getting our value from?
Hearing that, those of you guys that follow Youth Specialties on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, I want you to know you see sometimes Wednesday nights or Sundays YS Scoop saying, hey, we're praying for you tonight as you're preparing your lesson. I hope that you heard Jacob's heart right there, that you're not defined by what you're doing. It's what God's grace has already defined you as. Those prayers that he's putting out there, they're coming from his heart. They're not coming from a corporation saying, we want to look good. That's Jacob's heart right there, because he is YS Scoop. Can we thank him for being here today?
Oh, gosh. Thank you, man.